Hello and welcome to Eastern Roman history. The nephew of Isaac I Komnenos, the young Alexios I Komnenos, first appears at the age of 14, begging to join Romanus IV in his Manzikert campaign. Alexios then served Michael VII Ducas and crushed the revolt of the Norman mercenary turned adventurer Rousseau Baliol in 1074. Alexios rose to prominence as the Domestikos of the West during the reign of Nikephoros III Botaneiates, defeating Nikephoros Bryennios the Elder, Nikephoros Basiliakes, and the Paulican rebels Leca and Drobomir. Alexios had married Irene Dukina in 1078. He had previously married in 1076, but his wife died in 1077. In 1081, Alexios, along with a coalition of supporters, and at the head of an army, revolted against Nikephoros III. On the 1st of April 1081, on Ascension Day, Alexios led a bloody coup into Constantinople, which saw Nikephoros III deposed and become a monk. However, Alexios appears to have lost control of many of his soldiers, who proceeded to loot and pillage the city. E.R.A. Komnene recalls the event. E.R.A. Komnene, the Alexiad, Book 2, Chapter 10. Once inside, they scattered in all directions, in the main streets, at crossroads, and in alleyways, in their cruelty sparing neither houses nor churches, nor even the most sacred sanctuaries. In fact, they gathered from them heaps of booty. They did refrain from murder, but all other crimes were committed with complete and reckless disregard for decency. What was worse was the fact that even the native-born soldiers did not abstain from such excesses. They seemed to forget themselves, debasing their normal habits and shamelessly following the example of the barbarians. Alexios, now emperor, invented new titles such as Sebastocrator, so that he could reward his family and fellow partisans with honours. To say the situation was bleak at the start of his reign would be an understatement of epic proportions. The treasury was empty. The Normans had landed in Greece, the Pechenegs were poised along the Danube, and the Turks had pushed the Eastern Romans to the shores of Asia Minor. The empire had been ravaged by civil war, and was reliant on a crumbling army, weakened by years of neglect and poor funding. In Anna's words, no other state in living memory had reached such depths of misery. The Alexiad, Book 3, Chapter 9. Alexios asked the church to deliver up their wealth and precious ornaments, which the emperor melted down to mint money to pay for mercenaries. Alexios debased the gold content of the nomisma from 35.8% in the reign of Nikephoros III from 1078 to 81 to 10.6% by 1092. So few were his resources, the rest of the metal in the solidus was made up of 72% silver and 16% copper. In August 1081, Alexios raised his mother, Anna Dalasena, to the rank of Augusta, or Despoina. This gave her full civil control over the empire, effectively making her joint emperor while Alexios fought his wars. Alexios sent light infantry to harass the Turks and deter them from crossing the shores of Anatolia. Sultan Suleiman sued for peace, and thus the river Dracon marked the border between Turk and Roman land. Then, Alexios led his army west to relieve Dyrrhachium. It was a complete disaster. Not only was Dyrrhachium lost to the Normans, but Alexios suffered a major defeat in his first battle against the Normans, himself nearly being captured. Alexios returned to Constantinople to regroup. In 1082, Alexios I granted the Venetians a very generous trade treaty for naval assistance against Robert Guiscard. He also allied with the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV against the Normans. Henry promptly invaded Italy to attack the Pope, Robert's ally. Also, Alexios instigated Abelard, Robert's nephew, and Herman to rebel against Robert Guiscard in Apulia. During Alexios' recovery in Constantinople, John Italos, the consul of the philosophers, the spiritual successor to Michael Psellos, and one of his former protégés, was put on trial for heresy. His crime was that he followed and expounded Neoplatonist thought to such an extent that people doubted if he was even a Christian at all. After being tried by both secular and clerical authorities, Italos and his philosophy were anathematized, but Italos was later rehabilitated. Alexios tried to relieve both Joanna and Ohrid, but was soundly defeated by the Normans. Bohemond, Robert Guiscard's son, attacked Varia, but was repulsed. Raoul of Pontoise captured Skopje, but was bribed by Alexios to defect to him. Bohemond then marched into Thessaly, besieging Larissa and capturing Trikkala. By the end of the year, Robert Guiscard returned to Italy to deal with the numerous threats to his core territories. In 1083, with over 7,000 Turkish mercenaries, Alexios marched to Thessaly to relieve Larissa from Bohemond's siege. Control of mainland Greece, the empire's most valuable remaining region, hung in the balance. The Battle of Trikkala saw the first real victory of Alexios I in the Norman War, and resulted with the expulsion of the Normans from Thessaly. Alexios then captured Castoria, resulting in many of the remaining Norman garrison, led by Peter Aliphas, to enter Roman service. In 1084, Emir Abul Qasim, a commander of the Seljuk Sultan Suleiman, attempted to lead a fleet into the Propontis, but was defeated by Titichius and Botaneiates at the Battle of Kyparission. In the autumn, Robert Guiscard returned to Greece, despite the Venetians trying to defeat their fleet. The Normans captured Buttarinto and defeated the Byzantine Venetian fleet. Some 13,000 men drowned in the battle, and 2,500 men were taken prisoner. Robert also captured Corfu. In 1085, Robert Guiscard fell ill and died as he led his army to capture Kefalonia. With the death of Robert, the Norman conquest of the Roman Empire was abandoned, and the Normans pulled out with Bohemond returning to Apulia to confront Duke Roger. That same year, Antioch was lost. In 1086, the Pechenegs, invited by the Paulicans that Alexios had expelled from Philippopolis, raided deep into Thrace. However, Alexios was able to drive them out. In 1087, Alexios led a massive army to decisively defeat the Pechenegs. His campaign ended with little success and with significant casualties. His army was saved from great destruction when the Cumans attacked the Pechenegs. From 1088 to 1090, Pecheneg raids continued. Alexios successfully won over the support of the Cumans, and at the Battle of Mount Livonion on the 29th of April 1091, the Byzantine Cuman army overwhelmed the Pechenegs, ending in a decisive victory for the Byzantines. In 1092, Alexios reformed the currency, eventually revaluing the Roman currency by 1109, and introducing the full-valued hyperperon, as well as reforming the collection of taxes to reflect the empire's new financial reality. Alexios sent his fleet under John Ducas, who successfully dealt with the Turkish adventurer Tazax, as he had been attacking and occupying the Aegean islands. He followed this up by suppressing rebellions in Crete and Cyprus. In 1094, the Cumans attacked Byzantine territory with a man claiming to be Leo Diogenes, who claimed the throne. Alexios managed to destroy this threat. He followed this up by imposing a brutally harsh stranglehold over the northern Balkan countryside for their part in aiding the Turkic hordes, as reported by Theophylact of Ohrid. In 1095, Alexios, with the Sultanate of Rum in civil war, began to prepare Nicomedia as a beachhead for his reconquest of Anatolia, when news suddenly reached him that the Latins were approaching from the west. Alexios had already had a friendly encounter with Count Robert of Flanders in 1087. Alexios had received the feudal oath from Robert and 500 knights, which helped him in his Pecheneg wars. The arrival of hordes of peasants in the People's Crusade caused disruption, but Alexios overcame the predicament by ferrying the People's Crusade to Anatolia in 1096, where most of them were massacred by the Turks. That same year, the First Crusade arrived. Alexios employed everything he had learned from his experience and new knowledge of the West to use this armed pilgrimage to regain Nicaea and much of Asia Minor. In 1098, Alexios marched to aid the Crusaders at Antioch. However, faced with an approaching Turkish army and news from Count Stephen of Blois, who abandoned the crusade, Alexios turned back. Without Alexios' presence, Count Raymond of Toulouse was unable to persuade the Crusaders to hand Antioch over to the Romans. By 1099, Jerusalem had been reconquered for Christendom by the Crusaders. In 1100, Alexios persecuted the Bogomils, commissioned a refutation of their doctrines, and burned Basil the Bogomil in the Hippodrome. At this time, Alexios asked Bohemond to surrender Antioch. Alexios sent troops to capture Laodicea and other ports along the coast of Cilicia and Syria, but by 1103, Tancred, Bohemond's nephew and regent of Antioch during Bohemond's captivity by the Turks, drove the Romans out of Laodicea, but Alexios retook it in 1104. Bohemond travelled west, raised a large army, and launched a papal-sanctioned expedition against the Romans, striking at Epirus, just as his father had. However, Bohemond failed to take Dyrrhachium, and the Roman navy cut him off from Italy. Alexios imposed the Treaty of Devol on Bohemond in 1108, which made Bohemond Alexios' and John Komnenos' vassal. Meanwhile, Alexios, to deal with Bohemond, had to abandon his gains in Cilicia and Syria. Alexios responded to Tancred's seizure of his lands in Syria by trying to get an alliance with the Seljuks of Rum in 1111, but it came to nothing. In 1116, Alexios launched a final campaign against Anatolia and successfully took Dorylaeum and Polybotos, but Alexios did not capture Iconium. Instead, he accepted the transfer of Anatolians to Greece and the vassalage of the Seljuks, which, just like in Antioch, proved to be no concession at all. During this campaign, Alexios fell ill. Anna became his doctor. As his health waned, Irene, his wife, and Anna incessantly nagged him to make Nikephoros Bryennios the younger, along with Anna, emperor instead of John II. Nonetheless, Irene Dukina started to take the lead in the government in his final 2 years. In 1117, Eustratius, an acolyte of John Italos and client of Anna Komnene, was accused and condemned of heresy. This trial was certainly part of the intrigue between Anna and John. In this case, this was a move by John to remove one of Anna's supporters. On his deathbed, John stole into Alexios' room, took his signet ring, and rushed to secure the city of Constantinople with his supporters. On the 15th of August, Alexios I Komnenos died of his illness. Alexios saved the empire from collapse and expanded its borders. He successfully handled the First Crusade and overcame every enemy he faced. He reformed the army, administration and economy, as well as cracked down on religious dissent like never before. He dealt with numerous plots and innovated where necessary to see the empire's fortunes restored. He left the empire to his son John, continuing a legacy of strength for over a century. Angold says of Alexios, Michael Angold, The Byzantine Empire, 1025 to 1204, page 148. As a result of Alexios' perseverance, Byzantine prestige and power were restored. Byzantium was once again the dominant power in the Near East and the Balkans, but there is no disguising that the foundations of this power were very different from those of the Empire of Basil II. Alexios may have hoped to restore clearly defined frontiers and frontier regions of the sort that had characterized the Byzantine Empire under Basil II. Outside a relatively restricted circle of lands around the Aegean, Alexios' authority was personal in character. The Crusader leaders were his lieges. the Seljuk emirs his federates, the Venetians his servants. This gave him some claim to moral authority, but it was no substitute for the strong administrative system which had held together the Byzantine Empire under Basil II. Even in those areas where a regular provincial administration existed, it was increasingly permeated by private interests. At home and abroad, imperial authority rested on much flimsier foundations. If Alexios had restored the appearance of power rather than the substance, his work gave his heirs hope that a full restoration of Byzantine authority was still possible. His solutions may have compromised the old Byzantine concept of imperial sovereignty, but there were benefits to be gained. They suited conditions in a world which was rapidly changing. The circumstances of Alexios' reign strained that marvellous ability to adapt which Byzantium displayed throughout its long history. The Crusade created an entirely new set of conditions within which Byzantium had to work. It focused Western Europe's expanding energies on Byzantium and created a dilemma which its emperors never properly resolved: how to harness the energies and resources of a power which was potentially hostile. The regeneration of Byzantium required Western cooperation. The result was the interpenetration of Byzantium and the West in a way which had never happened before. Byzantium's frontiers became increasingly permeable as Westerners established themselves in various capacities on Byzantine soil, while Byzantine influence spread outwards into Western lands and the Crusader states. The opportunities seemed limitless. History may judge that it was all a mirage, but at the time, Alexios seemed to have opened up a new chapter of Byzantine ascendancy. I have been your host, Daniel Maynard, and this has been Eastern Roman History.